We don't want America's future to be built with shoddy steel from Shanghai. We want it built with the strength and the pride of Pittsburgh. It's Pittsburgh steel.
We
it's
are
US
listening to
steel,
President Trump in West Mifflin, Pennsylvania. He's talking about the agreement he is announcing today between U.S. Steel and Nippon Steel, but he also just made an announcement of an expansion of the existing 25% tariffs that were imposed on steel. Those will now be doubling, according to the president. Just now, I want to bring in CNN anchor Caitlin Collins. Caitlin, cover this stuff most days. Was not expecting that element of this to be a central part of the announcement today. What's your understanding of things right now?
Yeah, we had heard from White House officials that there might be some news in this speech today, and just there, the president announcing that he is lifting these tariffs on steel and aluminum coming into the U.S. from 25% to 50% is certainly going to raise some alarm bells, and is really just the president only increasing something that he has believed in ever since his first administration, when he put steel and aluminum tariffs in place and then reinstated those, lifted some when he took office this time around, and now says he is lifting it to 50%. He seems to say there was some deliberation, Phil, over whether to do 40% or 50%. And his Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, was on hand today inside the Oval Office and is there with him right now in West Mifflin. And so that is a headline coming out of this, as the president is there to announce a deal that really, Phil, I mean, this is the culmination of back and forth negotiations and questions of what was going to happen here since 2023, when Nippon Steel came out and said they were going to buy U.S. steel to the tune of $15 billion. It caused a ton of backlash here in the United States. President Biden vowed to not let it happen because he was worried about U.S. national security. Trump himself actually opposed this about 6 months ago. He had posted on Truth Social that he would not allow this to happen. And even today, there are still questions about what this deal means and whether or not how the control structure is really brought up, because Peter Navarro told us yesterday in front of the White House that the Japanese company is not going to have any kind of involvement or control when it comes to final decisions. Now, I think some people have said, it's hard to see that they're going to invest billions of dollars in this company and not have any decision-making power at the end of the day. And we haven't gotten a ton of clarity out of the White House on what exactly this detail and this deal is going to look like that the president is on stage touting, in addition to announcing those much higher tariffs on steel and aluminum coming into the U.S.
Yeah, the terms of that, the details are extremely important. Also, my appreciation to Caitlin, who is often my gut check for, wait, that sounds new and really important. Confirming it is, in fact, new and really important. Caitlin Collins, as always, look out for Caitlin just a few hours on the Source. That's weeknights at 9 o'clock Eastern here on CNN. Joining us now to discuss, former Trump economic advisor Stephen Moore. Stephen, there's a lot I want to talk to you about. News. As with every day and every week, there's no shortage of economic news. But just to start with the idea of doubling steel tariffs in this moment, they were already problematic, I think, for some foreign capitals right now. What does this mean?
Well, let me start by saying I do support this Nippon Steel deal. I think it's a good deal for everybody. I think it's a good deal for the Japanese. I think it's a good deal for the U.S. steel workers, and people who've invested in U.S. steel will come out well too. So I'm very pleased about that. And I've said that all along. Even when Trump was against it, I was for it. I think he's come to a good solution. And I haven't read the fine print either about how it'll actually work, but there will be some U.S. oversight of this company, and that's what Trump was insisting on. So I like that. I'm a little queasy about these steel tariffs. There's been a lot of studies that looked at what happened when Trump raised steel tariffs in his first term. And what most of the evidence finds, Phil, is that we did save steel jobs. The problem with the tariffs is that all the other companies, the manufacturers, the car companies and so on that use steel, their steel was now more expensive. And so on balance, the evidence is pretty clear. We lost jobs because of the steel tariffs. So I don't think it's going to work.
And this time around, unlike the first time around where there were a process of granting exclusions or getting exclusions, lobbying for exclusions, they've made clear there will be no exclusions here. I assume that's also going to apply to the 40% tariffs. Does that make them more effective, more draconian on some level?
Probably. Look, again, I haven't seen the final details. I just heard of this myself, so I'm trying to sort through it. But that's a pretty hefty tariff, a 50% tariff. And that means steel is going to cost more. I mean, it's simple. You have to pay the tariff to bring things in. And so think, for example, with our auto companies, Trump wants to bring more auto jobs here, But if their steel is more expensive, what's that going to mean for the cost of a car? So there's an upside and downside. The people, you know, with Trump there in Pittsburgh, they might gain jobs, but other areas probably will lose them.
Yeah, the downstream effect, which economists have also often tried to make the point to the president and his administration, hasn't necessarily worked up to this point.
But the other thing, by the way, is, you know, we've still got this controversy over what the courts are going to do and what the courts are going to say. You know, one day they said he can't do it, and then there was a stay. I think that may end up going to the Supreme Court, and it's hard to predict what the courts will say, whether the president actually has the authority to impose tariffs without the will of Congress.
You know, what we've heard from administration officials is, look, we think we can win this case, but even if we lose, you know, we can do 122, we can do 301, we can do 232, we can do 388.
There are ways around.
They're going to do it no matter what. Do you believe them?
We'll see. You know, we'll see. Look, as someone who's not a big fan of tariffs, I have to say that Trump has been on a roll over the last 3 months. He got the UK, and then he got China, at least on paper, to agree to something. Now he's saying they're not living up to that. But then just at the time the Europeans were saying, well, let's make a deal, now some of his leverage might be lost if the Europeans say, well, you can't raise the tariffs. So that's what brought them to the, you know, I like the fact that he does use tariffs as a way to get better deals and to create a level playing field for the U.S. And that's, you know, we want fairness.
The possibility of a re-escalation with China, which I think came onto the table today. And look, we've done a lot of reporting on this. There's a very clear view inside the administration that the terms of the agreement that they reached with the Chinese officials, the joint statement itself, were not being lived up to. The response that you saw from the president today was a result of that. If this goes back to where it was or starts back on that path, what does that mean?
It means we're back to ground zero again in terms of getting a deal. I'm not, as I said, I'm a free trade guy, but I think most Americans, the one thing almost all Americans agree on is that China's a real problem, both in terms of what they're doing militarily, the fact that they don't play by the rules, that they steal our technology. So I think most Americans are with Trump in getting very, very tough with China. That's very different than Canada or Mexico or the Europeans. So, and I view them as sort of like the old Soviet Union. You can't trust them. They don't keep their word. So remember, Reagan used to say, trust but verify. Yeah. If we're going to get a deal with the Chinese, we better make sure they're living up to it.
I want to ask you, Jamie Dimon spoke today. Actually, there were a number of very interesting comments in his remarks at the Reagan Economic Forum. But this in particular, take a listen.
We have problems, and we got to deal with them. And then the biggest one, underlying both that, is the enemy within. I'm not as worried about China. China is a potential adversary. They're doing a lot of things well. They have a lot of problems. What I really worry about is us. Can we get our own act together, our own values, our own capability, our own management?
Given the fact that the cornerstone of the president's economic agenda from a legislative perspective is currently in the midst of a process underway on Capitol Hill, a partisan process underway on Capitol Hill, what do you make of that?
You know, I'm not sure what exactly it means by the enemy within, but it is absolutely true. You know, if we're going to compete on this world stage, we better have the best educated people. We better do something about our, school system. We better make sure we got the training programs, that we're creating the best and most capable and skilled workers in the world. And if that's what he means, I agree with him. That's the single biggest challenge. But China is, look, the two countries that matter the most in the world economy are clearly the United States and China. And China clearly wants to take over the dominance of the world economy from us. We better be on guard, and we better bring our A game. They're how many? They've got well over 1 billion people in China. So this is the big issue of the next 50 years: is will the United States, will China be the world economic superpower? And Phil, I'm going to put my money on the United States.
It's been a safe bet up to this point. There's no question about that, based on the last 200 plus years. I wanted to spend a lot of time talking to you about the big, beautiful bill. We unfortunately got
I'll tell you this, it's going to pass.
That's what I was going to ask, real quick.
Way, but it will pass. I don't know if we were talking earlier, whether it gets done before
Timelines
July 4th, I don't know.
Stephen Moore, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much. Well, let's get more on that dispute we were just talking about with China. CNN's Mark Stewart is in Beijing. Mark, sources tell CNN the White House trying to set up a call with President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. What's your sense of how likely that is at this point?
Well, Phil, as you know from being in Washington, never say never, but we have heard of promises or mentions of these calls before, and nothing has come to fruition. And quite frankly, it's not the way Xi Jinping prefers to do business. He would rather there be diplomatic talks on the ground level as opposed to leader, as opposed to a high-level discussion. But look, the thresholds can change, and the storyline keeps changing, so let's not rule it out completely. If something like this happens, though, optics are going to be very important, Phil. Xi Jinping is going to want to make sure that he is not answering to Donald Trump.